director of the International Monetary Fund and the first woman ever to hold this position at the IMF. But in fact, her career was defined by many firsts. She was the first female chairman of the major international law firm, Baker & McKenzie, one of the world's largest firms. She was the first woman to hold the job of French finance and economy minister, which also made her the first woman ever to hold that government position in any G7 country. She's broken through many glass ceilings, which we'll talk about today. And in her tenure at the IMF, since taking the helm, Madame Lagarde has modernized the institution. She's pushed the boundaries of economic insight to empower women. She's pushed the boundaries to help leaders overcome corruption and push for collaboration. And she's worked with transparency and always in service to others. Madame Lagarde is at the fore of trying to solve the world's most challenging economic problems, but she's also remained a steadfast advocate for women's empowerment because she recognizes that when women are empowered, society and economies thrive. As a visionary force in global finance and a pioneer for women around the world, she's faced opposition and resistors of change in every phase of her career. But she's faced those moments with a strength of character, humility, and respect that truly defines the necessary skills that create great leaders today. Madame Lagarde lives by the motto, which I love, of our high school, Holton Arms, that is, I will find a way or I will make one. And in doing so, Madame Lagarde defines leading the way and the work and the conversations that we're having today. So with that, Madame Lagarde, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know you are a very busy woman, an organization with 189 countries that you are navigating the world's challenges with, so thank you for joining us. I want to start our conversation because you're someone who has been such a steadfast supporter of women, understanding and appreciating the power and unlocking opportunities, but you are also someone who has spent the majority of their career in leadership roles in very male-dominated industries and navigating male corridors of power. I would love, now that we are, as I said, sort of the dust is settling with the Me Too movement, for you to spend a little bit of time talking about where you see the world today in the context of what's happened in the women's space, but also particularly because you are in those conversations, those meetings, those corridors of power that still are so male-dominated. So I would love to hear what you see and what's been surprising to you.
Well, good morning, Maura, and good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be amongst a group of predominantly women, actually, apart from a couple of men who are very welcome in this room. We are amongst ourselves. So, where do I see? Well, first of all, let me just backtrack for a second. You've given me way too much credit in your introduction, but you know, my vanity felt really good for a moment. But I wish I could solve the problems of the world. What I'm certain of, though, is that if we could reduce the participation gap, if we could reduce the wage gap that exists between men and women in all countries of the world, including the Nordic countries that praise themselves with doing a lot better than the others, I'm sure that we could address some of the key issues that are at the forefront of our agenda and our list of concerns, one of which is clearly the rising inequalities that we see around the world, which is affecting in particular the middle class in many countries of the world. And when I look at all the membership that we have, 189 countries, the sort of average gap in terms of women's participation, even in advanced economies, is still 16%, 1/6. if you look at the wage gap, because participation is number of women in the workforce as compared with men in the workforce. So we have a significant gap there. But when we look at the wage gap, same thing. We have still in advanced economies as well as in emerging and low-income countries a significant gap. So one way of reducing inequalities that actually have a bearing on stability, have a bearing on productivity, have a bearing on growth, is to actually reduce those gaps, to make sure that there is no such inequality, fully and totally unjustified by all the research and the work that has been done by us at the IMF, but also by many other international and national organizations. It's just a no-brainer that economies would grow, that productivity would improve, and that we would have more stability. So I'm at a loss as why it doesn't happen and why it doesn't happen more quickly. When I took over as head of the IMF, I was convinced that we had to do more research, more analytical work in order to identify the policies, whether it's a tax rule, whether it's public spending, whether it's structural reforms, whether it's making sure that countries have childcare centers in their arsenal of tools. I was really determined that we could find ways of helping close that gap. And there are multiple ways. It depends on countries, it depends on how developed those economies and those societies are, but it requires a long-standing effort. So when you say the dust is settling, it is settling in a way, but I wish it wasn't settling, because I think that it's a long-standing quest, and one that has no finishing line, I'm afraid. So I don't think that we should be resigned to it. I don't think that we should be aggressive about it, but I think we should be just steady at identifying wherever we are, whatever organization we belong to, whatever position we hold, where there is a gap, where there is a discrimination, where there is a legal impediment. I'll give you one example, which I found striking, because I was a lawyer by background, and a lawyer is a lawyer is a lawyer. And we did a study together with the World Bank, which demonstrates that of the 189 countries that are members of our two organizations, about 150 of them have in their constitution, in their legal framework, for lack of a better word, discriminations that operate against women. Now, in the worst case scenario, you have prohibition to inherit when the parents die. You have no right to have title to land. You cannot produce a collateral if you want to borrow money. But it goes into all sorts of much more insidious ways in terms of authority, ability to take ownership, ability to have custody, and it goes on and on and on. So being a lawyer by background, I say, let us start with the legal basis first and make sure that there is no legal discrimination. And from there on, then you build and you start changing the culture, because it has a lot to do with culture. There are only 6 countries in the world at this point in time where there is no legal discrimination at all between men and women. That's really, really few. We need to work on that. And as I said, yes, the dust is settling in a way, but the race is on, and I don't see any finishing line. Yeah, but it doesn't make me sad or depressed, huh? Because I think that there is a lot of inner strength in the women's movement, in all of you, and in each and every one of us, in order to just carry on. And wherever we are, push, 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 and make space around us. So you're all in position of some leadership, somehow, somewhere in your life. Make sure that it's not just about you, but that there are other younger women that are also coming up the ranks, so that the day when you stop, they are there to also make space for others. That's my very strong wish.
So you mentioned that each of us has the opportunity to push and has in our roles of leadership in our communities to be agents of change. But I think what's remarkable about your career is that this commitment has been something that is a defining thread throughout the work that you've done prior to the IMF and the new dimension that took on. And what has really struck me, as I said earlier, is you've navigated very male-dominated industries and you've broken through glass ceilings, often the only woman in the room. But you also are someone who said that when doing so as a woman, that you have to be true to yourself and not to pretend to be a man or behave like a man, that being a woman is neither a handicap or something to hide. I would imagine that this is sometimes challenging when there are people who may not understand how to deal with that type of leadership. And particularly, I was so struck earlier in your career, you were unabashed, it seemed, about that as well. Where did that come from? And how did you navigate those environments when you felt so committed to who you were as a woman leader at a time when many people would put gender aside and not be able to have that same authentic commitment?
You know, Maura, I'd say two things. Number one, I had a role model in my life, in my professional life, not my personal life. My mother was holding that role in a beautiful way. But in my professional life, I had a woman partner at Baker McKenzie who was the sort of the lead partner because she was putting more money on the table than anybody else. And in those days, you know, in the early or in the late 70s, early 80s, that was how you defined success. Might still be the case, but in those days, certainly, it was how many more clients, how much more fees, and how did you manage teams of associates? Well, she was topping the boys by a long way. And they resented it terribly, but at that particular law firm, which I chose because of the yardsticks that it was using to measure success, she was the best. So she was the managing partner in that particular office. And she was really tough and demanding, but she was also very attentive. And in a way, I think she helped me grow up from a baby lawyer to somebody with confidence. And what I admired about her is that no matter how strong and tough and demanding and hardworking as she was, there were two things that she would always do. She would always go to the hairdresser once a week. She always would have her nails manicured beautifully once a week. And every day she would call her daughter twice. And she was always impeccably dressed. It's a tough call. And she was setting really high standards. So I think this is sort of back in my mind that she was managing to sort of accommodate her femininity. And in those days for her, it meant going to the hairdresser and having her nails done. She was accommodating her motherhood, maternity, whatever you call it, by always staying in contact with her daughter. And yet she was as tough as nail when it was a matter of dealing with a hard case, dealing with a merger, an acquisition of whatever she was dealing with. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that is really deep inside me and that many of you probably share is that when you find yourself in a room full of men, which is sometimes has been my situation for a long time, and is still the case now, although I made a commitment not to attend any meeting without a woman in the room other than me.
That's why you're here. Yeah. Yeah.
I can't help thinking about very trivial things in life that, you know, bring us together, men or women alike. And I can't help thinking about my children. And it gives me that sort of additional strength and sense of relativity, you know? Are those serious problems so critically important that they override the really important things in life that have to do with, you know, bringing up a child, making sure that they're big boys now, they don't really need me, although even after the age of 30, they still put a call to mom when things go wrong. But those things matter 10 times more. And remembering Monique, my female partner at Baker McKenzie, who would invariably, even in the middle of a big negotiation on an acquisition, would say, whoops, terribly sorry, 6 o'clock, I'm calling my daughter. Think about it. Now, clearly she was in a position of leadership, but at any point in time, you can find a way to remember for yourself what is really important here. So that has helped me face this sort of dark suit, gray suit rooms with a little smile on their face.
Yeah, picking up on that point, sort of you talk about your children really being this force to help ground you as to what's important, but oftentimes we talk about men and their careers and women and their careers. Women's conversations are inextricably linked to motherhood and children and those sacrifices and challenges and guilt that we hear about so often or personally live through in a way that we don't hear in conversations with men. Mm-hmm. Do you think women have to sacrifice more given this, and again, not to make generalization, but oftentimes relationship to this family dimension, even if it may be a powerful grounding force in a way that's different to men and how they think about their careers?
Well, first of all, I think that it's a parental responsibility, and I wish all of you have a partner in your life that is taking equal responsibility and spending equal time on parental obligations. It's not always the case, let's face it, and certainly was not my situation. But I have the privilege of time, or age, if you will. And I can, in retrospect, actually say that while you could regard it as a sacrifice, because you cannot get it all at the same time and at the same speed, quite often, in retrospect, if you take the entire professional life that you have, it gives you that additional strength that is a huge asset moving on in your life. So the passing of time is something that is difficult to accept for any of us, for obvious reasons. But I think that you have to assess sacrifices versus benefits in a longer period than just the years when it's really hard and where you have to run from the childcare center to your job back to home and when you don't have a lot of support. But later on, it's unbelievable the strength that it gives you. So I know it sounds a bit funny to say that, but I can assure you that it's true.
But you have to look at the big picture versus those moments.
And I was told when I was in sports and an athlete, I was told one thing: grit your teeth and smile. And there is a lot about that you have to do through your life, because nothing comes easy. And you have to grit your teeth, smile, get on with it, but also appreciate that over the course of time, there are things that you've invested in, that you've sacrificed, that are going to pay back big way.
One of the things that struck me about your career, you're someone who has been a mainstay on Forbes' list of the most powerful women, and one of the few women who's remained on the list since its inception, but really the only woman actually who has remained on the list in 3 different roles across 3 different industries. You were in law, you were in government, and now you're working on the policy side. And we know today, now more than ever, we're seeing this need to be able to traverse industries and to be able to have that breadth of experiences. But it's oftentimes easier said than done. When you think about the leadership skills that allowed you to make those jumps successfully, what are the things that were the driving forces behind them, and which of those roles stretched you the most in terms of your own leadership development?
Oof. I think the one that I was best prepared for was to be a practicing attorney, to be a lawyer, to operate with clients and to manage team later on, and moving from being a young lawyer to being a more senior to being a partner. But then after that, it was really a jump in the unknown quite often. And
are you a natural risk taker? Is that jump something that comes?
Yes, I think so. And the reason I was a risk taker is because I was empowered by my parents. My parents did crazy things. My parents let me do crazy things when I was much younger. And in retrospect, You know, and I discussed that with my mother before she passed. I said, how could you do that? And she said, well, we trusted you. We thought you would manage. I mean, I don't want to go through the list of crazy things that she and my parents let me do, but yes. Hitchhiking and going across France on the back of a motorcyclist that I had no idea who he was and what kind of motorcycle he was. At the age of 15. Okay? I mean, those kinds of things. So going across the United States on Greyhound buses back and forth at the age of 19, all by myself, eating vegetarian canned food without cell phones and none of that stuff. So I think that gives you the sort of strength later on to say, okay, I'll take the risk. What is there to lose? And I might have the strength to actually overcome that and learn in the process. But so when I was appointed from being a practicing attorney to being chairman of Baker McKenzie, I just had to work with the team and learn as much as I could from them and move on. Granted, it was at a time when the firm was so low, in such a bad shape that probably nobody else wanted the job, which is often the case when women access leadership position. So whenever the situation is dire, whenever the accounts are really dark, you offer the job, take it. Take it, because you're not going to take it further down. It can only go up. Take it. It's okay. It's true. Mm-hmm. So then later on, when I was drafted to become a Minister of Trade for France and then Minister of Finance, those were tough journeys because trade was okay because I had, run the firm Baker McKenzie around the world, and I was a good trooper, I was a good traveler, I was a good, I had business acumen. I had spent 20 plus years of my life in the private sector. But moving to Minister of Finance was a different kettle of fish because, from the law to move into finance and economy at a time when the financial crisis really hit in 2008, that was tough. So it was a lot of hard work, probably harder than any man in equivalent situation would have put in, because we tend to do that. We tend to over-prepare, we tend to over-labor. That's in the nature of the beast, I guess. But I to test because many of those, men advisors were seeing me coming as Minister of Finance. Look on their face. You think you're going to run this ministry? Well, we'll see about that. So it was hard. But I think in every risk-taking decision that you make, you have to be a little bit bold. You have to just dare. I think dare to change for yourself and dare to change around you. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You just bounce back and you collect yourself, and you shouldn't feel guilty about it. And I think working with a team of people around you is a huge strength that you can also harness to bounce back and move to something else.
You mentioned that women are oftentimes brought into positions when there is a crisis and a cleanup, and that there are different leadership skills. Civilizing force. You said famously that if Lehman Brothers was Lehman Sisters, we wouldn't have had the financial crisis. What are those? And again, there are some generalizations, at least, that tend to hold true, at least the majority. What are the leadership traits that you see in women that need to be cultivated more at seats of power today? And conversely, what are the ones that you see within male quarters of power that women also should be looking to cultivate as well, to be able to have that well-balanced set of skills and experiences? Obviously, diversity at the table is important, but also across your own leadership growth as well.
I think women have enough strength, talent, and skills about themselves without having to look at what the men are doing. I've always been very, very strongly convinced of that. And it's fine if the leadership that we exercise is slightly different. It's equally respectable and it's equally efficient. I've been asked that question before, so I thought about it. I think that there are three attributes, areas that you need to cultivate in order to be able to exercise leadership efficiently. And it boils down to confidence, energy, and generosity. Those three, and they apply to both men and women. Confidence, it's this ability to sometimes say, I'll dare, I'll do it. I was not necessarily groomed for that. I might be a little bit out of my comfort zone, but that's okay, because I have the confidence to try, and I'll do the best I can. And confidence is something that you receive from others, and it's something that you give to others as well. It's a bilateral, it's a give and take process, which is what makes it so great, because what you give, you get back, and constantly. The second, energy, you do nothing, you go nowhere without energy. And again, this is something that you can bring about yourself, that you can generate by decent food, by a good life rhythm, by being sensible about what you do. You don't have to be a super duper athlete, but you can certainly help your body help yourself. And energy is really needed. And I don't mean to say that you all go into super protein diets. I think we have it. If we have health, and we're lucky to have it. And the third one is generosity. I don't know any long-standing leader who does not have some generosity about her or him. If you're in leadership for yourself, it's only going to take you so far and so long. If you're in leadership because you are doing it for the organization, for a mission, for the community, for others, then it might last. And then, you might give more than you've received. And that's what matters, I think, to a leader.
As we wrap up, your influence is so far-reaching, both given the roles that you've helmed, as well as the issues that you've championed for change. If someone were to take a step back and look at your career and all that you've accomplished, what's the one thing that you hope that they take away from the work that you've led and your continuous efforts to strive for the greater good?
Whoa, to say. My very nice director of communication, who is around somewhere, says, what defines you is grace under pressure. That's kind of nice. But I would hope that the generosity bucket will also survive me and will be a bit of my legacy. And then there are lots of deliverables, making sure that women have a space, women are given their chance and their opportunity to thrive is something that has agitated me ever since the beginning, because I saw other women suffer and go through hell around me, and I don't think that it is fair. So that would be it.
Well, those are remarkable things that you've done. And as we wrap up, I saw the cover of Town and Country magazine this month, and it had the headline with you on the cover. It said, "This woman will change the world." And I would like to revise that headline and say, "This woman has changed the world." So thank you, Christine, Madame Lagarde, for paving a brighter future for all of us and for the world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maura.
Thank you.
Thank you.